Welcome everyone who's just entering into this special space that we are creating, a space to reimagine uh, illness, a space to reimagine dying, death, grief, and really living fully all the way through the end. So good to see you streaming in here right now. We're going to have a fabulous, um, unique, and special opportunity to be with two incredible people. And I think there could be some magic made here together. So if you're just joining us, I'm just going to dive in. My name is Brad Wolf, and I'm the founder and executive director of Reimagine. We are a nonprofit organization that's aimed at transforming our individual, our family, and our community experience of some of the hardest things that we face as humans. Namely, how do we face death? And then really, how do we embrace life? And so that's what we're doing here over the next number of weeks. We've launched what's called Reimagine Life, Loss, and Love, our virtual festival. This event, Diving into the Depths, featuring Larry Brilliant with Rabbi Sidney Mintz, is one of our signature events for this festival, and we're so delighted that you're with us to experience this conversation. I want to orient you today very briefly to make sure you know what's going on inside the Zoom world if you're unfamiliar. So there's a chat box that you can utilize, although today you can't utilize it for a while. We're going to open up the chat box later on for a Q&A, so be ready for that. And you'll be able to click that little button, chat, and you can start typing later on. Also, please turn your camera on or off. We prefer it on so we can see your smiling faces and make this feel as live as possible. And finally, your mics are going to be off for this occasion, unless there's some necessity that we'll determine later for you to turn it on, which I don't see that happening. So with that in mind, if you do have any questions along the way from a technological perspective, you can email us at hello@letsreimagine.org, and someone on our team will be there to answer questions. I want to start off also by thanking our incredible sponsors for making this entire festival happen. We really rely on these incredible organizations, on the foundations that support us, and also the support of people like you in the audience. So if you feel compelled, you can donate to support this work at letsreimagine.org/support. And thank you in advance for making this possible. Now, all of the Reimagine events as part of the festival begin with an intention that is really read to set the tone for what we're doing together. And I want to begin with that here today. There is no life without death, no love without loss. They are in constant complementary motion. But never before in our lives has the world stood so still. In the face of distance, illness, and isolation, we are here together, reimagining a changed world. Kinder, slower, more just. We are reimagining the giving and receiving of love, the cycles of loss and new beginnings, and what it means to be fully alive. We are here. And with that, I want to turn it over to my favorite rabbi in the world, Rabbi Sidney Mintz, to introduce our featured guest today.
Thank you so much, Brad, and the incredible staff and supporters of the Reimagine End of Life Festival and project. And it really is such an honor for me to be here today with my dear friend. And as I call him, he's not just this incredibly brilliant pandemic specialist, he's a real mensch. And he is a spiritual guru for me personally. And you'll see why in a few moments. Larry Brilliant was the inaugural executive director of Google.org, which was the charitable arm of Google. The first CEO of the Skoll Global Threats Fund, established by the eBay founder Jeff Skoll to address climate change, pandemics, nuclear proliferation, and conflict in the Middle East. He does have a fabulous sense of humor, I will just tell you, even though so much of his work is serious. He currently serves as the chairman of the board of Ending Pandemics, is also on the boards of the Skoll Foundation, Salesforce.org, the Seva Foundation and Dharma Platform. He is the author of a book called Sometimes Brilliant, which is the way that we were really introduced to one another. And he hosted his dear friend Ram Dass's memorial service in San Francisco, which I was so honored to be a part of. And you will probably recognize him because he is the chief pandemic correspondent currently for CNN. Just going to jump in and say, Larry, when we talked about this, I wanted to begin with a couple of lyrics from our favorite band. What a long, strange trip it's been already. And sometimes the light is shining on me, other times I can barely see. And this is not going to be a scientific talk, but it's something that I really have wanted to do since actually in February, when Larry was studying with a group of rabbis that I gathered. And I have to say, it was the first week of February, and he had a little bit of a head start on all of us in terms of this. And so I want to start by saying, Larry, you had that head start. You were so integral as a leader with the World Health Organization during the smallpox pandemic. And do you still feel like you have that head start advantage in addition to being that expert? And from the vantage point of having known about this, not just this pandemic, but having dedicated your entire life to be immersed in this very difficult work, what can you tell us from that vantage point in terms of where we are today?
Well, first of all, Brad, thank you. Sid, thank you, everybody. On my screen, you are a patchwork quilt of dozens of little squares. And Sid, I just took your square and made it bigger and put it right above my camera so I can look right at you. I like this. So you asked if I thought I had an advantage. No, nobody has an advantage against this bug. That's sort of its super weapon. It's a novel virus, which means none of the 7.8 billion of our brothers and sisters on Earth have any immunity to it. It means that it can kill kings and queens and dictators and bad people as well as good people. And it is no respecter of religion or race. So I don't think anybody has a head start. I've been studying pandemics for about 30 years since we eradicated smallpox. So I have had a real interest in them. And I've been, as my wife Girija would say, I have correctly predicted 12 of the last 1 pandemics.
So you do have a little bit of head start on us.
That means I blew 11 of them.
I'm sorry to say you were right about this one. I'm so sorry to say, I wish you weren't right about this one, but you were very, very right. Right and wrong. There are certainly places where we've done things right and certainly places where we've done things wrong. What could we be doing better in this moment?
Well, as Brad started in the invocation, we could be using this time to make the world more peaceful, more just. We could be using this time to make ourselves more peaceful and more just. I think we're all afraid and stunned and surprised to find ourselves in this situation. And it's not just you and me and all the squares that are here. It's everybody. It's everybody all over the world. We're sharing this experience. It's as if this were the first global telecast, but it's not television. We're all sharing this experience. And you said earlier, it's the most silent the earth has been. You mean for humans? Animals continue, and thunder continues, and lightning. But every country. Every week I have a call with WHO, and we go around the world, and all of the regional offices report what is the pandemic like in India or Bangladesh, or what is it like in Wuhan and Burma, Myanmar, or what is it like in Europe and South America, and particularly in Africa, which is the only way we find out much about what's happening in Africa. And the difference in what is happening is based mostly on time. When did the virus get there? and competent government. Those are the two big things that distinguish a place like Wuhan or Northern Italy, or the early days of North Korea, when that church became an epicenter, or Manhattan, the hot spots, so to speak, Seattle. They're going to become part of our history, part of our catechism, as we remember the places that, you know, either because of bad luck or bad management, let us down. And then we remember the good places. Tedros, who is the executive director he's the director general of WHO, he was asked, what are the characteristics of a place, a country that has handled the virus well? And he said, well, first of all, they're usually an island. Often they've had experience with a disease like this. That was true certainly for Korea and Thailand. And he said, inevitably, they're governed by a woman. And it's true. If you do your little go around the world, countries that are governed by women are doing a much better job of dealing with this pandemic. So this is something truly we're sharing with everybody in the world all at once. We're talking about it here, and there's probably 1,000 conversations like this going on all over the world, at dinner tables and mosques and synagogues and churches and Buddhist vihars and Hindu temples. And it's not fair, both because of its haphazardness and randomness. It's also not fair because in Georgia, the state of Georgia, 80% of all the deaths were African American. That's not fair. It's not fair because all over the country, between 35 and 50% of the deaths in each state are in nursing homes or elder care or places that we're supposed to be protecting our elders. It's not fair because if you're an immigrant, whether it's from Syria or from Guatemala coming into the United States or trying to get into Germany to get into Europe, you're 5 times more likely to get the disease and die from it. And of course, if you're homeless, it's very hard to go home and self-isolate at home. So the virus is exposing what were already the inequities and the lack of equities in the world. If you're lucky and you can live on a mountain with trees around you, as I do here in Mill Valley, you can get on your Zoom or your Blue Jeans or that's another Zoom-like thing, or Jabber, and you can pretend it's normal. Most of the world can't pretend. The supply chains are all broken. It isn't just the funny part about not being able to get toilet paper. We're on the brink of famine in 4 or 5 places that are always on the brink, and this is going to put them over the brink. Mm-hmm. And I want to talk just a little bit about the disease, the biology of the disease, and it's earthy. But this disease is behaving like no other virus in my lifetime, or any virus I've ever read about, or any other doctors ever read about. It literally affects from nose to toes, from loss of smell to something called COVID toes, which look like frostbitten toes. But it seems to affect every organ. It affects kidneys, and patients wind up with blood in their urine sometimes. It affects your liver. We know that it affects your smelling and your taste, which means those are probably cranial nerves. And it has a particular affection for your blood vessels. And you know about what it does to your lungs. So it's as far away from being a flu as you could conceivably go in thinking about a disease. But it has in common that it is a respiratory disease. So the people who would like to diminish it or pretend it doesn't exist are able to say, well, it's like the flu. It is not like the flu at all, other than in the way that it is spread. And even then, it can be spread by every other bodily fluid and every other act that you can imagine. It can be, but it isn't in the majority of cases. So it behaves from its spreading like a respiratory disease. But there are things that you can do that make it into an aerosol. If you're washing your clothes and you scrunch it up and you flick it, you'll make an aerosol and you'll spread the virus. If you flush your toilet with not putting down the seat. You can create an aerosol. And there's 100 other things you can do when you shake up liquids. And aerosols are bad because they spread the disease, not 6 feet or 12 feet, but all over the. So it's a strange disease with a higher than we expected fatality rate. It spreads faster than we could have expected. And it seems to spread differently in different circumstances. So we use this term R naught. Okay? If any of you saw Contagion, how many of you saw Contagion? Oh, usually it's almost everybody. But there's a scene in there where Kate Winslet goes up to the black, tries to explain the R naught, the replication value. And it is the number of secondary cases that a primary case creates. And that's a measure of the speed and the transmissibility of the virus. This one's higher than flu by maybe 2 times or 5 times higher. So we have to deal with that as well. One really good thing, there has never been a time in history where science moved at the speed of light. There have been 30,000 peer-reviewed articles printed in the last 4 weeks about the COVID-19. There's more research being done on viruses, on vaccines, on tests, on antiviral drugs, on ways to keep people healthy. When this is over, we will own a treasure chest of great ideas and experiments and science that will help us against many, many diseases in the future. And I hope against this one too.
Larry, let me address that because that's the first glimmer of a little bit of hope that I've heard in what you've been talking about, that, you know, because of science and because of the amount of attention that has been placed on finding a vaccine, on treatment, that there's a little bit of a silver lining in the fact that there's going to be, as you said, a treasure trove of research about whatever would come next. And science and information and facts have been something that have really been up in the air for the last 4 years. And I'm wondering if you can address how the national environment, the current leadership, contribute to how our country is absorbing and dealing with this in terms of fake news, conspiracy theories, kind of individual states' reactions to the shelter-in-place orders. You know, I've been trying to really, I mean, for my own sanity, stay away from 24/7 news, but I am aware of just, you know, the issue. You know, I love the way that you sign your emails about just specific things that you can do to stay safe, to prevent the spread. And I'm seeing this, you know, kind of this grossness of masked versus unmasked people in our country. So what is your advice in terms of getting accurate information, absorbing it, and transmitting that accurate information?
Well, let me first tell you my relationship to science. When I was a young boy, I was in Detroit. I went to Temple Israel. It was a Reformed Jewish temple. I think people used to call it Temple Church or something like that. And I was in my confirmation class, and the rabbi asked us all to write an essay on choosing between God and science. And I declined to choose. And I wrote an essay which said, I'll take one of each. And the rabbi didn't like that, and he told me to go back and rewrite the paper. And I said, okay, I won't choose between God and science. I'll choose between science and God, and I'll take one of each. So he kicked me out, of course, of confirmation class. Years later, I was asked to address all the Reform rabbis. They were having their conference in San Francisco. And I began with that story. I said, are you sure you really want me here? I got kicked out of confirmation class. And they laughed really hard, harder than they should have laughed. And I said, why are you laughing? They said, you're the 3rd speaker in a row we've had here who was kicked out of confirmation class.
Welcome back. We will definitely confirm you, Larry.
So I see science through my own spiritual lens. And I think it is a phenomenal tool that we have. When I was in India, my guru, Neem Karoli Baba, said, smallpox will be eradicated. This is God's gift to humanity, to lift this one form of suffering from the shoulders of all of us. So I look at this virus, and it is the 30th or the 40th animal virus to jump from animals to humans in the last 20 or 30 years. You know the names of others: SARS and MERS, Ebola, Zika, Lassa fever, West Nile, swine flu, bird flu. I can go on. These are all friends. And this is the first of the next 30 that will leap from animals to humans over the next 2 or 3 decades, because humans are now living and encroaching on animal world. We're sharing the same forest. We're cutting down, clear cutting forests, and then we're moving and to animal territory. And we're consuming more meat. We're consuming more wild animals than we ever have before. So we're sharing viruses. And these viruses are called zoonoses because they're viruses mostly of animals. And every one of them that can affect a human and cause an epidemic is 1 out of 100 that just jump species and don't affect us. But we had a pandemic of swine flu in 2008. We had an influenza bird flu pandemic in 1957 and in 68. Each of those killed 1 million people. And of course, the one that we always compare ourselves to, which is the 1918 swine flu, which killed between 50 and 100 million people when the population of the world was 1/3 of what it is today. So that's the way I look at this. I don't look at it as an individual disease. I look at it as part of a continuum of diseases that jump from animals to humans. And I look as it is part of the world that we live in. It is not foreign to the world. It is part of it. We knew this was coming. There's a group of us that are called the Cassandras. I don't like the way it ended for Cassandra. If you know your Greek mythology, it didn't end very well. But it wasn't an individual who predicted this. The entire science of epidemiology has been saying it's not a question of if, it's only a question of when. So some of us were saying this for a long time. I helped to make the movie Contagion because of that. I wanted to make something which portrayed what this might look like. But it's, you said you wanted to hear the optimistic part of the science. We couldn't have had the optimistic part if we didn't have the dark part first, because how deadly and frightening this virus is has forced people to put dealing with it at the very top of their priority list.
You know, it brings me really to the, people have talked about, this is a storm that everybody is experiencing, but each of us is in our own boat, that everybody is experiencing it differently. And people have said, is this, you tried to calm me down. Every once in a while, I get a little anxious. And Larry tried to calm me down and said, Sid, this is not the zombie apocalypse. So when you get to the point where you're calming somebody down by telling them, don't worry, it's not that bad. It's not the zombie apocalypse. It's pretty bad. And people have really, been asking, is this the end of the world as we know it? Or is this just the beginning of a new way of living, a new way that we're going to be embracing one another in different ways? As now, look where we are right now with several hundred people in little boxes. And given that, is there some hope ahead in the way that our world is shaken up and changing?
Well, I think there's a lot of hope. And it's not only not the zombie apocalypse, it's also not a mass extinction event, if that makes you optimistic. No, I'm kidding about that, obviously. This is not the end of the world, but it's the beginning of a different world for sure. All of you will remember that there was a time before COVID and a time after COVID. There's no going back to the kind of normalcy that we had before. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be life or love, that we're not going to get back to work, we're not going to be creative and inventing things and read things in poetry that gives us pleasure and make new friends that fill us with love and excitement. It means that for the next 3 years, before, we're going to be dancing around this virus. It's going to take us probably another year. Maybe we'll get lucky and it'll be 10 months to have a vaccine, a good vaccine, which creates immunity that lasts a long time and that doesn't require a cold chain and injections. And we need to have one that doesn't require getting vaccinated every year. So we're trying to get a vaccine like the yellow fever vaccine, one shot and you're good for 10 years. So that means it's not just a vaccine that we want, it's the right kind of vaccine. If we don't get the right kind of vaccine, we'll settle for one that gives us a year. So I think that'll take us, I think you'll start seeing small samples of the vaccine in September, October, November, first responders being given them. There'll be trials, and then sufficient quantity will take a little time. Once we have enough vaccine, and that is going to be 7.8 billion doses if we only need one dose, double that if we need two. Once we have that vaccine, the arrival of a vaccine is not accompanied by rainbows and unicorns. The arrival of a vaccine means you have a vaccination program. That means we have to have a program in 220 countries. And we have to go to the farthest reaches of the earth with our vaccine. Find the most disadvantaged people who will always live farthest from the centers of power. Find the people who are in the lowest castes, the discarded communities, the refugees, the poor. It's a very biblical quest that we will be on to vaccinate everyone. But along the way, the wealthier countries will probably get it first, it being the world, and normalcy will come back. And the world will have various different openings and revelations. But between now and the vaccine, we will have false starts, as we've obviously had in Georgia, where they've opened up, and now the estimates of how many will die has doubled. But we will work our way around it. We will be careful. You know, when you go out in public, you'll wear a mask, you wear gloves, you wear glasses, and you should wear a hat to protect you from somebody sneezing with the virus. And it's good to have two hats. One you leave out of your door, and when you go outside, you build it into your life. It becomes not so strange or so onerous. And you take care of the people around you. I love the masks that say, I'm wearing this for a friend. You're not wearing the mask for you. You're wearing the mask so you don't infect and no one else infects your grandfather, your grandmother, your mother, your father. So that part of our life will change for a little while.
So wait, Larry, I just want to, you know, as we are fielding so much, you really, I mean, when it's kind of like the old, when E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen. When you speak, I really listen, and I quote you all the time. So what I'm hearing from you is, yes, wear a mask when you go out. Yes, wear gloves when you go out. Yes, wear glasses or goggles or an actual shield if you have one. And yes, wear a hat to protect yourself in case somebody sneezes and it gets on you. And that is a new reality and something that will be for, you said, at least a year, correct?
Well, you'll be doing it until you are immune. And that's either until the vaccine or until you get the disease and it makes you immune. And since we're uncertain about how much of a bad disease you have to have and what antibodies are created that make you immune and how we can test for them and know them, it'll be a little process before we have a immunity passport that tells you that you're safe. But we'll get there. It'll take a little while. So yeah, either you will be immune from the disease or from the vaccine. And then your world will change back. And the people who have not yet reached that stage will yearn more and more for the vaccine.
Mm-hmm. So I did promise that for the last 15, 20 minutes, we were going to go to Q&A, and we're not there yet. But I wanted to give us a little space now to shift, because as I said, we could keep you on here for 3-4 hours and not let you go, because I know so many questions. But I did want to, I mean, I feel like as somebody who has inspired me so much spiritually, to shift a little bit to the spiritual. As I said before, you've had a lifelong enduring friendship with Ram Dass, and you have this balance. And I first of all, I apologize on behalf of the entire Jewish people and the entire Reform movement that you are one of those kids who was told there's not space for God in science. And I do apologize because I feel like it's a lost generation. Many Jews felt like they were kind of shoved aside because they were spiritual seekers and scientific seekers, and there was no space for evolution and creation. There's, of course, room for that, and we celebrate it. We celebrate God, and we celebrate science. I love that you're willing to have a relationship with many rabbis to this day. But I feel like that balance really I struggle with every day in terms of trying to find hope, trying to find a way of giving solace through what everybody feels is such uncertain times. And I know that, this only started 2 months ago, us going into these little boxes, but it has had a profound impact on people's anxiety and depression and mental health and their sense of not being able to make any plans for tomorrow, let alone this summer, and disappointment after disappointment. And so I asked you from a spiritual point of view, what advice do you have? How do you take care of yourself when it's COVID? I mean, you're immersed more than anybody else. How do you take care of yourself? And how do you give us a little bit of advice about how to have hope when we're feeling so vulnerable?
Well, I'm on the same roller coaster. We're all on it. Knowing about the disease does not change my disappointment or excitement when we find out something new that's helpful. I just try to, in my case, so let me just take a step back. My guru received people from all different religions, but primarily he was an Indian Hindu yogi. And he had us study the Bhagavad Gita, and many of the yogas, not just Hatha Yoga, but Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, all of these other yogas. The yoga that he gave me to practice is called Nishkam Karma Yoga. It basically means that your work is worship. And he told me to go help eradicate smallpox. So I've been kind of single-pointedly trying to do that for the rest of my life. I look at anything that's like smallpox and I go work on it because it's so hard to try to think for myself. If I just follow instructions, it works out well for me. But yoga, is a word which means to unite, to yoke your horses to your cart, in a way, to yoke your soul to God, and to do it by different practices. So for me, when I need to do my practices, it's to go to work and to try to stop this virus from killing people and hurting them. And I sort of feel like Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. I'm in the middle of Yud Mahayud, a big war. But that works for me. Everybody's got their own different one. Listening to Dharma talks is really a wonderful thing to do. But because I'm more of the work kind of person, the way I listen to Dharma talks is because my wife is listening to them in the other room, and I go in there and I pretend that I'm not interested, and then I get caught into Jack Kornfield or listen to someone else, and I stay for the Dharma talks. But each of us has a different way. We all know that. We know what calls to us, what liturgy calls to us, what practices call to us. But for me, it's work. I'm really lucky that way. I can throw myself into my work and persuade myself that I'm both working and I'm working for my path to God, which is to, Nishkam Karma Yoga means to work without attachment to the results. And that's easy to do if you're not attached to how the dice is tossed. It's really hard if you have to practice not being attached to whether the pandemic ends or not. That's the yoga that Maharaji gave me to work with. But they're all hard. Mine's just hard in a different way.
They are. Everybody's path is hard, and it seems like each one of our individual paths has become more challenging, more difficult than we could have ever imagined for this pandemic entering our path, entering our life. Can you give us, before we open up to questions and you answering more of them, what would you say we can do? I mean, there's an election coming, I hope. I pray to God there's an election coming in November. What are some of the things, everyone has something they can do to make changes, to mitigate the suffering of either individuals. Some, as you say, pray. Some people pray, some meditate, some work, some are on the front lines. But everybody has something to contribute right now. And as we're looking at the world in 6 months, looking at November around the corner, what are some of the things that we can do to support science and to support, obviously we can't from our little boxes do anything about finding a vaccine, but what can we do to support people, to create community and to sustain ourselves?
You mentioned Ram Dass, so let me just tell a story about Ram Dass, because we would go and spend time with him in Hawaii. We used to live together, Girij and I, and Ram Dass and his partner lived together in San Anselmo for a number of years in a big house, which was really a wonderful time. But his house in Maui, he had a big altar. Actually, every room had a lot of altars, with a lot of different sacred images on them all. The altar in the center would have images of Krishna and Buddha and the Dalai Lama and other of his friends who had passed away. And on that altar, he also had a picture of Trump. That was very difficult for me. But Girij and I would ask him, you mentioned Mirabai would ask him, how can you possibly have a picture of Trump on your altar? He said, well, I have to get over my feelings of him. I may hate him, but I have to work on being able to see God in every person, even in Trump. Well, I can't do that. I would, instead, I'd like to just defeat him at the ballot box. But you should know that Ram Dass, who was much more evolved than me, that's the way that he dealt with the feelings that we also feel. But when I'm lecturing or I'm doing CNN or something like that, and the issue of Trump comes up, I criticize him in my lane. I criticize him for lying about the epidemic. I criticize him for offering people bleach as a possible antidote. I criticize him for saying that we have enough tests when we don't. I criticize him for saying that this virus was going to go away and disappear in April. I criticize him for not making the resource available for us to do plan A, which was to find every case and just quarantine the people around the case so we wouldn't have had to close down the country. Because all of those knock-on effects are the fault of decision-making that were made by the President of the United States. So even if I could love him, I would still say these things that he did that were wrong mean that we have to do everything we possibly can to defeat him at the ballot box.
Well, I'm in solidarity and in sisterhood and brotherhood with you, Dr. Brilliant, because I'm not at the level, the madrigas, we would say in Hebrew, of Ram Dass, who is, in many people's minds, a guru and a spiritual brother. And so I have a very challenging time loving Trump. And I feel like part of my service is to make sure that we have something sane and that we save democracy. And part of it, part of saving democracy does have to do with how we respond as a country, and kind of turn everybody towards being mensches and away from being so selfish. So I'm going to ask our Reimagine hosts to open up the chat room because I could ask you many more questions, but we're going to open up the chat room so that people can take some of their own questions. And obviously we won't have the time because you have a hard stop at 6 o'clock. And I know people have been watching you on CNN. And you can look at the chats. If you click on the chat box, Larry, you will be able to pick up whichever questions you would like to answer.
How do you estimate the impact on Africa where there is such a darkness on information available? I remember like week 6 into the pandemic, and we would see maps of where the disease was. And all the countries that had a lot of cases were lit up with a little light, a blue light. And Africa and all of the global south was dark. Latin America was dark. Southern India was dark. And Africa was dark. And I would tell people, it's not dark because there are no cases. It's dark because there's no testing. Because people don't have the tests, because you can't distinguish COVID in the early days from malaria or from influenza. So they're not being reported. And in fact, that has unfortunately proven to be true. And now you're seeing the virus detected in South Africa, in Nigeria, in the Kibera slum in Kenya. There's epidemics in Zimbabwe, and in the north of Africa, which we worry about the most because the Sahel area is prone to famine. So what now I would tell you is that there's a great organization inside of Africa, which is called Africa CDC. And unlike our CDC, which I love, but is having some difficulties, as you can tell, the African CDC is just coming into its own. It's doing a great job. And Africa is now getting the ventilators that it needs. It's getting the medical PPE, the personal protection equipment that it needs. But the tests are beginning to show that the pandemic has reached there. And I think we should steel ourselves for knowing that the cases, the caseloads and the deaths in Africa are going to go up quite a bit. And then they won't. But for now, that will be the next place that the virus finds itself. How would you evaluate the risk of sending children to school and daycare when knowledge of the disease and its spread is constantly evolving? Oh, I think it's the number one question for many parents who love their children dearly and have been stuck with them for 8 weeks in a small room, perhaps. And school is not just school. It's daycare, it's lunch, it's a chance for working moms to get a break and working dads to get a break. So there's a lot of pressure on trying to get schools open. There's a little bit of fiction and wishful thinking that kids don't get the disease. I think you're seeing now that there is a strange syndrome, Kawasaki syndrome, that some very few number of children, it's very rare, but kids do get the disease, and more importantly, they do carry it. So I don't know, I think the pressure will force the schools to open faster than the epidemiology would deem it wise, because there's a lot of other things to be considered. I think we'll find that schools will open. I think that the summer we'll see some, maybe not sleepaway camps, but day camps opening. And I think that there'll be experiments in ways to keep the schools safe. Maybe the kids, when the saliva test becomes more ubiquitous, maybe kids will be forced to spit every day. I don't think the kids will mind that. Take a spit test every day to be sure that they're not carrying the disease. And if you repeat that over and over again for 5, 6, 7 days, you can be pretty confident that there is no disease in that group. But it's a critical, important question, and I don't have a really good answer to it other than it really is a process. Do you have a blog? I do not have a blog. What was your impression of the Senate hearing this morning, and are you seeing any bipartisanship in breaking rank other than Dr. Fauci with the White House? Yeah, I actually, I was pretty impressed with Mitt Romney, who looked into the camera and said, "No, Mr. President, you should not be taking a victory lap about our testing. There's nothing about how many tests we're doing that should make us proud. You're falsifying the information. You should be looking not at South Korea to compare it to now. You should realize they don't need to do testing because they did the right thing for 2 months when you did nothing." But he was the only one. I thought Tony Fauci did a great job. I thought that the CDC head, Redfield, was trying to do a good job and then always seemed to remember that Trump was probably listening. I think it's tough to be in that position right now. Wouldn't you think so? to be a scientist in that room at this time when science is not very highly prized. But it
One
was
thing what you might have missed, Larry, there's just two words: flying and airplanes, question mark.
so. There are people flying today. There are airplanes flying today with 10 or 15 people on them, wearing masks. There will always be emergency needs that the need of flying overtakes the need and the fear of not flying. But for the most part, I don't think people will get into a metal cylinder with 200 or 300 strangers whose immunity status and disease status you don't know. So until we have a clear way of knowing what the disease status is of people who want to get on a plane and screening them so that people who have COVID are not allowed on, people who are already immune can come on and not wear masks, and everybody else comes in dressed to the nines with masks and glasses and gloves and hats. I think it's going to be difficult. People are saying that the airlines are facing bankruptcy, that the number of people who are flying is down. I think that is an industry that will be reorganized in some way. But it doesn't mean you're not going to be able to fly if there's an emergency or a need. It's just that there'll be fewer people on planes, they'll be more protected, and a plane will not be a place that's safe for you to not wear your mask for a while. As a health professional, I'm a bit curious about the reality of wearing shields in the real world. I don't know if that's literal or figurative. Do you mean shields like the visors, or do you mean the whole costume? Well, let me assume that you literally mean the shield. And these are plastic visors. I think they're very good. They protect you from physical contamination, but you still have to wear a mask to protect you from airborne contamination. Is that what you meant? Can you put another text in and let me know? Thank you so much for this honest, real information. Would you send your grandchildren to school in June and July if you were the decision maker? I don't have grandchildren, so I will choose some dear friends' grandchildren. When would you feel good about inviting folks from outside your home in? We have invited a few people inside of our house and practice social distancing, 6 feet away, wearing masks. And Dr. Anthony should get an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in a Tragedy. We usually think he should get a Nobel Prize, but I understand why you would say that. We don't see people wearing masks in public. Who wrote that? Preet? Preet, where do you not see people wearing masks in public? Can you just text me that? Can you talk about the prospects for a viable treatment for COVID-19? Look, I think we will get antivirals that work. We already have immune globulin, convalescent serum, blood that's taken from patients who've had the disease. You go to the Red Cross, you donate blood. It's spun down, and the kind of yellowish gray part that's at the top is serum or plasma. That is spun down, and it is injected into people to protect them from getting the disease or to cure them if they have the disease. And that works. It will work. It's always worked. We've had that treatment for the past 70 years or more. It's just not scalable. We can't treat enough people with it yet. But now that we have so many people that have recovered from COVID, and their serum will contribute to pooled serum, we will even be able to have that at scale. One person who has recovered can provide enough recovered serum to treat 3 or 4 people a week. And I think that's really good news. It's not only good news to treat people, it also means we can start testing vaccines and testing treatments, because it's not really ethical to say I'm going to give somebody an injection of a virus that could kill them if we don't have a get out of jail free card, if we don't have a treatment. So the more convalescent serum we have and the more we can use it in that way, the more we can speed up vaccination trials, vaccine trials, and antiviral trials. And the pace of science, as I said, is accelerating so fast.
Larry, I do want to go back to a question Bart Schachter asked. There were so many questions that came in right away. He wrote, vaccination is already a hot button issue in certain circles in the US. Do you expect the same or others to take up an anti-COVID vaccination effort? And that makes me reflect on, that the idea of when you see kind of anti-vaxxers and Nazi flags, Confederate flags, and pro-Trump flags, that the nationalism around this, that the anti-vaxxers, is there a possibility that that could flow into an anti-COVID vaccination effort?
The first vaccine was discovered by Edward Jenner in England in 1797. The first anti-vax movement was 1798. There's an anti-vax movement to every vaccine. When I was in India, many Hindus were anti-vaxxers because in order to make the vaccine, cows were sacrificed. You could understand why they would be anti-vaxxers. When I worked in the polio program in the Muslim part of India, there was a great deal of anti-polio resistance, anti-vaccine resistance, because there were rumors going on that in Abu Ghraib, American soldiers had humiliated and tortured Muslim men, and therefore the polio vaccine must be an instrument of terror. And their allegation was right, and there was a reason, a logical reason for being against the vaccine. There was a logical reason for being against the smallpox vaccine when it first was discovered. It was the pus from the udder of a cow put into a child's arm. I would have been against that then. So I'm not, I don't think of anti-vaxxers as my enemies. I just think I've been looking at this for many years, and I understand why it feels like there's too many vaccines all at once. I understand why for some parents who have a child who has autism, they may have discovered the autism about 1 year old, which is the same time all these vaccines were being given. I don't think of these people as our enemy. I think of them as having a different opinion. As far as COVID, it's such a horrible disease and it's so frightening. I suspect that there'll be a different reaction to it. But if there isn't, we will only need to vaccinate probably 80% of the world to get herd immunity. So we'll
Can you address that? Can you address that, Larry? That I know we just have a few minutes left, but two things. One, the idea of herd immunity, and then Brad Wolstad, Jim Wolf, and this is not a word in the Talmud, so I can't pronounce it. Remdesivir.
It sounds like Ramdas Avir.
Yes. Can it be as effective as Tamiflu if given orally and at onset of disease? Can you address the herd immunity?
I'm not a big fan of remdesivir other than the name. Ramdas's virus, in the studies that have been done, the first few studies were ineffective completely, and then the last study that has been widely triumphed it reduces the amount of time that people spend in the hospital by 4 or 5 days, from 14 or 15 days down to 11 days. And the test of this antiviral for reducing deaths was incomplete. It did not reach any mathematical validity. So I think we're really early in it. Maybe the company that makes it got a little excited about it and started marketing it. And nonetheless, if you or I were in the hospital and we were sick, we would take it because any help is a good help. There's 5 or 6 really good antivirals that are at various different stages of being tested. I'm highly confident we'll have one that's much better than remdesivir. And likewise, I'm very confident we're going to have a vaccine. And it's a matter of waiting and staying safe and making sure that you and your family stay safe and that you help the others. If you want to do something really wonderful and noble and exciting, give some money to the food bank, because there's so many people in our world who don't have the luxury of being able to shelter in place at home and order from a delivery service, or they can't go and binge hoard on toilet paper. It would be really nice to start that as a way to take care of other people. It'll
Well,
make,
Dr. Brilliant, I just want to say I love it now when people don't go 5 minutes over. They give like just a few minutes to take a deep breath. And I want to end on what you just said, which is such a simple mitzvah, which is sometimes I think we're overwhelmed. You know, I'm not Dr. Brilliant. I'm not out there doing the holy work. But as you said, everybody's work is different. And even if it's dropping off groceries at somebody's home who can't get out to do grocery shopping, or making a donation to the food bank, doesn't, it's not just that it makes us feel better. I think it makes us feel part of a community and a communal effort at goodness, at returning to a life that, as you said, it's never going to be the way it was, but moving forward to a life that is full of good deeds and love and compassion and working together and believing in hope. So with that, I'm going to turn it. Thank you so much, Larry. You are such a mensch, and we feel so
thank,
fortunate to have you here with us at Reimagine.
thank you.
Brad?
Thank you, Rabbi Mintz, and thank you, Larry, so much for this incredible presentation. I would love for those of you, now that the chat is open, if you're out there and you have access to the chat, please share something you learned from Larry and from the rabbi, some word of gratitude to share with them, how special it's been to have both of them with us today. I find obviously Rabbi Mintz is a spiritual guide for me in my life. I'm outing that right now. And now Larry is part of that as well. And it's great to hear that CNN, mainstream news, is hiring such good people to represent the kinds of things that we really need to be learning about. So it does make me feel better, and to have you here, Larry, as one of the leaders in this conversation. And hopefully you can get more and more people to listen to you every day. With that, I would love to just share with you a little bit about why we invited Larry and the rabbi here, just for a quick closing. Just to say that what we're doing and what our hope is with today's presentation and all the things we're doing at Reimagine is, as Rabbi Mintz talks about, we want to, yes, address the taboos around this topic and the isolation that comes from it, and the fear and the pain and the loss that we're experiencing. But our real hope is that we can leave the world actually better than before, that we can move from taboos to acceptance, from isolation to community, from fear to love, from pain to art, and from loss to a world full of celebration. And it seems maybe that's a long way off from where we are right now, but if we envision it, maybe we can work together with the guidance of Larry and Sydney and all of you on this call to get there together. And at Reimagine, you know, the things we're working on right now, we've dropped everything in our focus on this moment. We have launched, obviously this is part of an ongoing worldwide virtual festival. Please see more events. Tomorrow we have great events, one of which is our Dose of Togetherness, a partnership with UC Berkeley that addresses social isolation, serious illness, death, and grief, with an event where we're going to be talking about the way that yoga can help us, with leaders from Esalen, and Claire Bidwell Smith will be here this week, an incredible grief author. On the 9th of June every month, we're holding a collective candlelight vigil. We were so grateful the other night to have some incredible presenters with us, and we're going to have some more in June. We just unveiled a community resources hub on our website for all of you who have resources to share them with one another, because we have our own resources that we can provide right now. And finally, we're working on virtual memorial templates and kits, which we're launching later this week, to help people in a free DIY way when you can't be together to host your own memorial, or a memorial for someone you love, rather. How do we do that in this time where we want to help people and give away free tools to make that possible? So with all of that, we would love to see you at these upcoming events. Thank you. If we rely on your support at letsreimagine.org/support. That's the only way that this persists. And honestly, again, big thank you to Larry and to Rabbi Mintz for just combining the spiritual and the scientific, because really, if we separate out those two things, how can we move forward and really address the biggest questions that we face as a world? So that combination is so crucial. So if everyone, you want to just say goodbye, we have this little ritual that we're doing at Reimagine, where we go like this, we go like this with a big hug, and then we go like this with a kiss. Rabbi Mintz kind of solidified it even more simply with just the heart. That's, maybe we can incorporate it at the beginning, but we're doing this this and blow
Thank
the
you
kiss.
all. Thank you, Brad. Thanks for hosting us. Larry, thank you for the beautiful time that you've spent with us. I know your time is so very, very in demand. And so it's just,
Beautiful.
it was brilliant to have you with us.
So beautiful to see all these wonderful faces.
He'll be on CNN, I think, any minute now. I'm serious, right? That's where you're headed.
7:15. It's 6 o'clock. It just, they give me a makeup kit. I have to put the lipstick on and be ready.
Here you go, Larry.
That's a good look for him. All right, Rabbi Mintz has a new profession. All right, thanks everyone for joining. We'll hope to see you soon.
Bye.
Shalom.
Shalom.